Good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren LaFlamme with Bankers Insurance, and welcome to our webinar on how to stop difficult situations from spiraling out of control. Presenting today is Jamie Hasty from SESCO Management Consultants. We partnered with SESCO for many years, and since 1945, SESCO has provided human resource and employee relation consulting throughout the country. If you are a client of ours, we encourage you to take advantage of your access to SESCO. In addition, this webinar is being recorded, and I will share that recording with everyone registered at the conclusion of the webinar. Place your questions in the chat as you think of them. With that, I'll turn it over to Jamie Hasty, Vice President of SESCO Management Consultants.
Thanks, Lauren. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back. I know we do these on a quarterly basis. And as I was just sharing with Lauren, 'tis the season for disciplinary issues, performance-related questions, and sometimes separations of employment. We have been getting an influx of these calls since beginning of November. So it is a very timely topic. It's something that, especially even if you have good performance pieces and procedures in place, that as we roll into the new year is really, really important to kind of reiterate, reinforce with your leadership teams. So I'm hopeful today will be a great session for us. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen. And as Lauren noted, she will be recording this session, but also she will send out a copy of the slideshow with it. Okay, so you will have a copy of this. And Lauren was very kind to mention the SESCO Management and Bankers Insurance partnership. That goes back to 2013 when the Affordable Care Act came into play. And so we've been supporting the benefit side as well as the commercial side, account managers and support team and valued clients of bankers for now 10 years. There is access to SESCO through that relationship for basic telephone and email support and other higher level services based on your need as a business. If you have questions about that, please reach out directly to your broker or your account manager to navigate the correct process to get enrolled in that program if you are already not a current SESCO client, a current association member, and you haven't had access already. So let's talk a little bit about stopping discipline situations from spiraling out of control. You know, the crux of this is making sure that we have the right leaders in the right place, that we have good policies and procedures in place, and that we are taking the appropriate approach to discipline. You know, oftentimes discipline has such a negative connotation. And what I have found throughout my 17, 18 years in consulting and HR and just leadership with my own team and leadership within my family is that sometimes when we flip the words that we're using and change out the terminology, it can completely change their perception of the conversation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. You know, when we look at discipline and performance management as a whole, it's not to, you know, make the employee feel bad about themselves. It's not to create consequences for their actions. It's not supposed to be this negative interaction, but many times it is for a variety of reasons. Personalities come into play, emotions come into play. Perhaps we have not done our due diligence throughout the course of their employment to address certain things and provide coaching and feedback, and now they're blindsided at being written up or let go. You know, all of these things are kind of a catalyst to situations that just blow up in our face, right? And so it becomes kind of a game of timing, facts versus opinion, supporting it with documentation and policy and all of these things. So we want to give you the good tool set to address performance issues in real time, but also when we get to a situation where we have to separate employment, what that looks like as well to best protect the organization. So why is progressive discipline so important? It is really, really important because the only thing that we have to defend the organization, the manager involved in that situation, to protect all parties, is that there has to be a paper trail. And many of the phone calls, I took one this morning specifically about a second in command manager that was underperforming, that they wanted to demote and move into other things. And the first question that I asked was, is there formal documentation? Well, no, we only had verbal conversations. I'm like, okay, well, did we document that we had these verbal conversations? No, we didn't. So the documentation is so important because, when we are working through certain behaviors, working through certain performance challenges, we need the documentation to back it up. We need it to solidify and crystallize, basically, here's what the issues are. Here's how we're going to work forward and work together forward to improve. But more importantly, if we can't, what are our next steps? And whether I'm auditing a client and their HR systems and files, or whether I am taking a phone call on a whim because a situation just arose, everything goes back to documentation. Many of the states that we are operating in, Virginia, North Carolina, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, all of these things, they're all at-will states. And a lot of times I hear from leaders that, well, I'm at will, that's what I'm going to separate on, or that's what I'm going to use as the basis of my disciplinary action. And I cannot reiterate the importance that at will, and while it's there for a reason, at will means they can quit with or without notice, with or without reason, and you can let them go with or without notice and with or without reason. However, at will protects us from nothing. Not against unemployment, not against charges of discrimination through the EEOC for any sort of protected class, which is age, race, sex, religion, national origin, genetic information, pregnancy, family medical leave, disability, marital status in certain states. That's why the progressive discipline and the documentation is so important when we're working through these situations, because again, if we get a charge of discrimination, you get a civil lawsuit, you get an unemployment claim, and you're like, wait a minute, this person was terminated for cause, not because they were laid off, and we have to defend all of those things. You got to use the documentation. So that's why it's so important. Plus, it's only fair to give the employees feedback on how they're doing. You don't want to take somebody through an entire year and get down to the performance evaluation or blindside them and be like, oh, you've been doing this, and this wrong. Well, where were you at 6 months ago? Why didn't you tell me? So this piece is crucial in your HR processes. So in your employee handbooks, here's a friendly reminder, you need a progressive discipline system. Now, they can be written any which way. I have clients that do it based on a merit system, or a demerit system, excuse me. It's like, if you do these 5 things, these are worth 1 point. If you do these 5 things, these are worth 2 points. Once you hit 6 points, it's a write-up. That's fine too, if that works for your culture and your organization. But you also need to be careful about how that policy is written, because sometimes they only outline certain disciplinary offenses, and it's not all inclusive, right? So then we lose the ability to document and discipline if something falls outside of that running list of 15. But what you need to have is obviously a solid policy that should be in your employee handbook. The employee handbook should be given out both at the time of hire, signed for acknowledgement, but anytime we update the employee handbook or we change a policy, the handbook needs to be reissued and re-signed for. I often see that as an issue in, progressive discipline systems where we've changed something in the handbook and management never submitted the new copy, the employee never signed off on the new copy, and so they're operating under the old policy that's 5 years old at this point. Well, that's the policy that we have to enforce, not the new one, because we didn't reissue. So please make sure we're communicating those rules, especially when they change. Also, this policy helps your managers manage the department, manage the location, making sure that A, they know what they're supposed to be enforcing, but B, that allows them to do it consistently. Now, I will also tell you consistency with discipline, performance feedback, performance expectations, and write-ups is crucial. What you do for one, you do for them all, regardless of whether this is your superstar employee or whether it is a underperforming employee. Because if we are inconsistent, if we are letting one or a group get away with it because they're our favorites, or we like the color purple and they wear purple every day, whatever it may be, that again opens us up to liability for not following our policy and procedure, and can blow back on us in a variety of different capacities in the event that a formal complaint is filed through the Federal Department of Labor or through civil litigation. Typically, what we see in a progressive discipline is that there are verbal corrections, written corrections, a final written warning, suspension with or without pay, and termination. And you kind of want to plot those out. Now, there's always going to be provisions in that policy that says, based on the offense or at management's discretion, we reserve the right to expedite that process. Again, the punishment needs to fit the crime when you get to that piece. But discipline should have good characteristics. Again, this is not supposed to be such a hurtful or negative experience. The whole point of discipline is to correct the behavior. Again, not to make them feel bad about themselves and make them, think that they're the worst person in the whole entire world. That's counterproductive. That is not what we want to communicate or implement into our culture. But discipline has to be fair. Again, what you do for one, you do for them all. There also absolutely must be an absence of emotion. We're human. We all have different personalities. Some of us run a little hotter than others at times, and we can have knee-jerk reactions. And so when we talk about discipline, emotions cannot play into those conversations whatsoever. I've talked about it in a variety of webinars over the years with bankers of fact versus opinion, or to put it more simple, behavior versus attitude. The only thing that you all can manage and hold accountable for with regard to policy and procedure is facts. They did it, they said it, it occurred, it violated this policy. Those are behaviors. Facts are behaviors. When we add in the attitudes and opinions of the manager or other parties involved in the situation, then we've muddied the waters, right? We're focusing on very subjective things. Well, and let me give you an example. Lauren, you've been late 5 times this month. And I think it's because you don't care about this team and you're not dedicated to our business and our clients. Well, that conversation is automatically going to put Lauren on the defense. She's going to say, well, what do you mean I don't care about our clients and this organization? I am dedicated. I've had X, Y, and Z going on. Life happens. I've been late. It's uncharacteristic of me, but I'm sorry. Instead of the manager saying, Lauren, when you are here on time, your dedication to our clients is wonderful. You're a great team player and, you do great work when you're here. However, this month, I've noticed you've been late 4 different times. Do you see how just flipping the words that we're using, focusing on the facts, and pulling out the attitudes and opinions, maybe Lauren really doesn't care about the clients or the organization. That's my own opinion. She may or may not. But the facts of the matter is, she's been late 4 times. That's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to focus on how those 4 tardies play into our attendance policy. Okay, so pull out the emotion. When emotion rules, it quickly can make you go hot, make the employee go hot. Then we're shouting, then we're screaming. I've had situations where the police have had to get involved because somebody's flying off the handle. You know, we don't want those things. Those are scary. Workplace, violence can occur in the moment or even after, and we want to be as factual as we possibly can in these situations. The other big thing that is a sticking point for me as a consultant, and I really work with our clients a lot on, and I try to coach them through that in situations when it does not occur, is the timeliness of discipline. It is not uncommon for me to get calls or emails from clients and they say, hey, I've got this situation going on. I need to write this person up. And we're talking through these things. And I'm like, well, has this been a pattern? Has this occurred before? And suddenly the manager's like, oh, well, but I want to tack in these 3 things from a month and a half ago that, also need to be addressed, but I didn't address them in real time. You can't do that because the employee is going to counter you in that conversation. They're going to say, okay, well, if it was so important to you and it was such an issue a month and a half ago, why wasn't it addressed then? Right? And it's a fair counter. It is absolutely a fair counter. Now, there are situations where maybe we're on vacation or scheduling wise, it may be a day or 2 after something occurred that we need to address. But weeks after the fact, or tacking in things that have been going on that have not been verbally coached or written up and documented and addressed with the employee is not appropriate discipline. Okay, so make sure it's timely. In a perfect world, 24 hours. And sometimes that's tough. Sometimes that's very tough. I understand that, but don't let it go on. Because then again, the behaviors continue, then we're more frustrated, and it just muddies the waters there. Another thing that's important for good discipline is that there needs to be an absence of surprise. If we have coached, if we have counseled, if we have provided verbal feedback, as we should be doing in a leadership capacity, by the time we get to the write-up, there should be no surprises. The same concept applies to separation of employment. Nobody should ever be surprised at being let go, unless we're talking about a sudden reduction in force or a closure. But even then, because of the WARN Act, sometimes they need to have written notice 30 to 60 days ahead of time. Nobody should be surprised, period. And again, the whole intent behind good discipline is that we want to try to prevent it from happening again in the future. There should be no blame, no finger pointing, no, this is all your fault. Sometimes it's the manager's fault too. Okay. Sometimes the manager has not provided the feedback or the necessary training or the touch points and the consistency there, and we have failed the employee. Not always the case, but sometimes. And sometimes we've done all of that and the employee still is not getting it. So be mindful that we're not finger pointing. We're not pushing it off and not taking accountability for our part in the process. And then document. I'll talk more a little bit later about what I want to see in that documentation. Okay. So we document management actions for a variety of reasons. I mentioned it earlier, but we have to have evidence. Every single employment decision, why we hire somebody, why we write somebody up, why we transferred them, demoted them, docked their pay, let them go, has to be supported with evidence. Okay. I've been getting many calls and emails, and lately, because of technology and the way we communicate, text messages. Screenshots. Well, I've got screenshots of the employee texting the manager or vice versa. It's not awful. Okay. But remember, certain things are not admissible in court if they cannot be traced back. So screenshots don't necessarily help document the case. I'd much rather have emails that can show the email accounts versus just a screenshot of somebody's name. I can't prove that that name is associated with their telephone number. Okay. So evidence is really important. This helps us improve performance to set, performance expectations, quantitative and qualitative performance expectations. This really does also allow us to communicate effectively with the employee, and it helps that relationship. So in a lot of my leadership courses, I talk about the importance of the relationship between the manager and the employee. Okay. Still, the number one reason why employees leave organizations is because of their manager. Even post-COVID, post-Great Resignation, post-quiet quitting, it's still about the manager. Okay. So the communication, these conversations and me providing performance feedback and having constructive conversations about where we need to tweak and modify helps that relationship. It shows that, look, I'm being open and transparent with you. And maybe they're giving you feedback as well. Hey, here's what I need from you as my manager. The lines of communication have to remain open. It supports our employee personnel actions. It gives the notice to employee. It plots out guidelines for future performance, and you can use it as training and development opportunities as well. Okay. But there are a lot of reasons why managers, unfortunately, don't document. If you have a personality profile like me, sometimes conflict makes us uncomfortable. Sometimes we stick our heads in the sand and hope that, they'll figure it out or on their own, or it'll just kind of go away. That always makes things worse. So sometimes we have to have those tough conversations. Managing employees is very time consuming. I will not downplay that at all. And a lot of times I hear from managers, it's their least favorite part of the job is managing the personalities and the employees and all of the shenanigans sometimes that come along with it. But it is so critical. We can't make an excuse that, I don't have the time. We absolutely do. You may get worried that somebody might get angry with you or confrontational in meetings. And because you're anti-confrontation, you avoid it. Or they want to be the super friendly, super liked manager. Or there is just a weird situation that popped up. And quite frankly, these managers are like, I don't know what to do with this. Which is a perfect reminder to call SESCO and we'll walk you through those weird situations. So there's a lot of reasons we don't document, but we don't want to fall into that trap, right? So things that I'm looking for in your write-ups, okay? And again, I do this when I audit my clients for their HR practices. I read through disciplinary correction notes and I provide feedback in the audit report on, this person said this, and this is what it was missing and why this is important. So I want the important facts. What happened? When did it happen? Is this the first time? Have we verbally coached or counseled on it before? And what dates did that occur? Okay. I want to know what employee handbook policy that their behavior violated. That needs to be expressly written in the write-up. This behavior, this incident violates XYZ company policy in the employee handbook, which you signed at the time of hire. Okay. Again, refer to any of those verbal coachings, corrections, counselings. That should also be included in the paragraph form. And here is one of my pet peeves as a consultant. And a lot of times I see it in written correction notices. The manager will write in immediate improvement needed. That's all they put in there. Well, what does that mean exactly? By when? What improvement needs to occur? What are the qualitative and quantitative actions that need to be taken to correct the behavior? Okay. Don't just make it generic. I want to see specifics, and I want to see specifics that are going to be taken by the employee as well as the manager if you have a dog in that game. Okay. So what are we going to take to get them back on track? What is the employee going to do? By when? How's that going to be measured for effectiveness? And then more importantly, when are we going to touch base again to make sure that we are on track? Okay. Get the employee's signature. The manager needs to sign it as well. Now, a question that I often get is, what happens when an employee refuses to sign? Happens all the time. For whatever reason, they magically think it still doesn't go in their personnel file. It does. So that's why we have witnesses in the room. Okay. So there should be, when we're doing a formal written correction, there needs to be a witness in the room. Typically, that's you. On the same level within the organization. Okay. It needs to be a manager, somebody that has authority. Okay. Because then if they refuse to sign, what happens is that you as the manager and the witness will write in employee refused to sign, you both sign and initial and date it. Okay. Now, certain states do require us to give the employee a copy of their write-ups. Most states do not. So you don't necessarily have to do that unless that is your historic policy in place. And then make sure, again, we're following policy and procedure there. HR is your best friend. If you have weird situations and you want to run those by us, or just normal situations, they don't have to be weird, you can always reach out to SESCO and we can help you through those as well. So with discipline, there are some checklists that I'd like. Again, make sure that they understand they're engaging in unacceptable behavior. We need to get back on track. This number 3 says discuss the negative consequences. So I'm going to change that last word. Let's call it an outcome. Let's discuss the outcomes versus calling it a consequence. Because often outcome tends to have a more positive perception than, using the term consequence. So, look, Lauren, if we continue down this path of you showing up late a few times a month, my concern is the impact that that's going to have on our clients. They may not be getting the service that they need. Projects may fall to the wayside. You may have to stay late, whatever the outcomes may be, versus saying, here's your negative consequence. You do it again, I'm going to keep writing you up. Now, yes, that is part of the progressive discipline policy. But when we flip it and talk about the outcomes, the good and the bad outcomes, it helps kind of soften that conversation a little bit. You also are going to want to explore why the unacceptable behavior is continuing. That is something that is important to kind of understand, not just the how are we going to fix it, but the why behind it. Why do we continue to have these issues? Help me understand. Then we develop that action plan and document the disciplinary actions taken. Okay. In the disciplinary interview, first and foremost, don't talk about the problem standing up, especially if there is a height difference. Sit down with the employee. Do not put yourself behind a desk. Sit beside them, sit catty corner to them. We don't put ourselves blocked behind furniture in the event that something goes sideways and we need to quickly exit the room for a safety reason. Okay. So think about how your room is set up, and sit beside them and turn and face them and look at them like this. It makes it less intimidating. Okay. Versus them feeling like they're sitting in the principal's office. We never want to start with an accusation or chit chat. Both of those kind of skew the reason why the employee thinks that we're getting together. If you are a leader that sometimes struggles with confrontation, or gets uncomfortable with that confrontation, it's easy to kind of get off on tangents or make promises and talk about all these things, and before you know it, you're like, wait a minute, I just gave them the world on a silver platter and I didn't even realize it. So be mindful of that. Sometimes, because we're close to the situation, we may not necessarily be able to constructively and objectively judge the problem. So, utilize other managers within the organization. It's a lot of talent that you can tap into, a lot of experience, that you may say, look, I've got this issue with the employee. Have you ever run into something similar? How did you handle it? Or this situation's going on, gosh, it baffles me. What do you think? Sometimes avoiding that prejudgment solely from your point of view gives you extra tidbits of information to consider. Okay. I'm not saying it's going to change how you handle it, but it may help you evaluate alternatives there. More importantly, we never criticize, correct, or discipline an employee in the presence of others. And I don't mean in the presence of a witness. I mean literally in the break room or on the showroom floor or whatever industry you may be in. We never have disciplinary or feedback sessions with employees in front of their coworkers. That should always be in a quiet, private location where we can have those open and honest conversations without them feeling humiliated or embarrassed in front of their coworkers. Also, never try to engage in disciplinary conversations when tensions are high. If you're upset, if the employee is upset, take a lap, take some time. If you find during that conversation that emotions are starting to rise, take a time out. Say, you know what, I can see that you're getting visibly upset, because again, we're focusing on facts, not opinions. You're crying, your tone of voice is raised, you're shouting. I think it's best for us to table this discussion for right now, and let's circle back when we've had an opportunity to calm ourselves down and to process. That's perfectly okay. Again, you don't want to put yourself or the employee in a situation where things can get so far out of control because of emotions are driving that it puts you or them in danger or other coworkers in danger. And last but not least, listen. Again, you got to understand the why behind what's going on. One of my favorite phrases in leadership is, I've got two actually. Tell me more, and then help me understand. Again, those two things tend to be less threatening compared to what were you thinking, or why would you have ever done that? Okay. So use those, they work. Share the blame if necessary. I mentioned this just a few moments ago. Sometimes we are part of the problem. We didn't manage it right. We were unclear in expectations. We delegated and set them up for failure because we didn't give them the power and control to do the delegated task. If we have ownership in why this is not working, take accountability for that. Maybe we need to give them more training, more focus, more touch points. Maybe I dropped the ball and forgot to circle back with them and just made the assumption that they were going to do it because they're adults. Doesn't always happen. find a better way and finish your correction on a high note. So remember the sandwich method. I know it's very, very basic. It's old school, but it works. Okay. Perfect example, when I was giving you the attendance scenario with Lauren, right? I started off with something positive. Lauren, when you're here, our clients love you. They're taken care of. You're a good team worker. Then you hit them with the facts. However, this month you have, shown up late 4 different times, which impacts client, operations. These projects are behind, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And then once we, talk about the why and the how and what we're going to do, we're going to end on a positive note. Lauren, I'm really glad we were able to have this conversation. I know we've got some good things in place moving forward, and I know that we're going to get back on track so that you can continue to be the amazing team player that you are here. Okay. Because when we end on a high note, it helps maintain that employee self-esteem. So they don't walk away from that conversation thinking, gosh, this is awful. I can't do anything right. Okay. Listening is a really, really important part to discipline. Whether that be performance, discipline, separations of employment, if they're talking, we shouldn't be talking. Don't interrupt, because that means we're not listening. If we're interrupting or talking over somebody, that means we're talking simply to respond and not listening to understand. Okay. You want to be empathetic. You want to be supportive. You want to ask questions. Again, help me understand or tell me more. Those probing questions will help get down to the bottom of what's truly going on. Make good eye contact. Okay. Smile and nod appropriately. And more importantly, leave your emotions behind. Get rid of all the distractions. When we are having these really, really important conversations, get rid of the phones, close down your email, turn your physical phone ringers off, close the door, make it as quiet as possible, but that way you can focus your attention on them. Don't get into a mental argument with them. Don't antagonize them. Make sure we're kind of listening for what is not said or reading between the lines, because sometimes employees will dance around the topics. And that's a good opportunity for you to say, or use the phrase, what I think you're saying is this, and then reiterate what you believe is going on, and let them kind of confirm or redirect that. Okay. So listening is really, really crucial. Going back to relationship, know the relationship and the personality of your employees. You're going to know which ones you can push a little bit more. You should know which ones you need to be softer with in your approach. Apply those. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't classify them. Don't make hasty judgments. And sometimes we have prejudice, not discriminatory prejudice. I'm talking about feelings from previous situations, maybe with either that employee or employees that this person in particular reminds you of. You need to be mindful of those. If you got burned years ago by an employee situation, and for whatever reason, Susie just is bringing me flashbacks. I feel like this is too close and just similar to what I dealt with Mike years ago. That situation was different. Okay. Susie is not Mike, and Mike is not Susie. And while there may be similarities to the situation, you've got to recognize that and not allow any sort of past feelings or past prejudice on particular things to impact how you address it right now. Okay. So when we have the disciplinary meeting, again, state the performance problem, ask for their viewpoint. More importantly, ask them how they plan to fix it. All too often, I see managers just say, here's what you're going to do to fix it. There's no accountability there. Make them come up with their own solutions. A, it requires them to think through really what is going on, their behaviors, and how they're going to address it. But B, that provides buy-in to the corrective behaviors. And, historically speaking, when employees have buy-in to performance things, they're more likely to follow those steps. Agree on that plan, and then give the written warning or oral warning and set that review date. Another area that I often find managers drop the ball on is we may be doing the disciplinary piece, and we may be setting goals or setting dates for improvement, but those dates come and go, and we haven't followed through on our end as a manager to touch back with the employee. So that's really, really crucial, because if you fail to, check back in by the date that you all agreed upon, and a month or two goes by, and then you want to write them up again for the same thing, you didn't do what you were supposed to do as a manager. And the employee is going to throw that back at us. Hey, we were supposed to touch base here, and you didn't. So I assumed we were all good, but now you're telling me we're not good. So, make sure that we're going through that. This is just kind of a sample discipline meeting worksheet that I often use and suggest clients use as well to kind of pre-plot out what we need to hit on in the disciplinary conversation. It's just kind of a guide there. But also what I think is important is to be mindful of our emotional responses and how we counter respond to that. So similar to, don't let your emotions rule. If you have a hostile or an angry employee, summarize what we've heard. Look, it sounds like you're pretty angry about this based on the tone of voice, or, you're raising your voice and you're shouting. I can see your clenched fists. Again, factual, observable behaviors. Avoid confrontation or becoming defensive or coming up to their level. Sometimes managers say, oh, well, the employee, got hot with me and I came right back in hot with them. Not a good move. Okay. That's how we get into situations where the police are called to remove somebody from property because somebody's getting ready to throw punches. We don't want that. Sometimes we get into very defensive employees and employees that are trying to bargain with us and negotiate this deal. It's not a negotiation. If somebody's becoming defensive, you need to preface it with like, look, I understand this may be difficult for you to hear this feedback. It's not fun for me to have to give you this feedback. But what we don't do is get into negotiations. You offer the reassurance and you connect the process overall to policy and procedure. You stick with the facts. There may be those very formal and procedural type employees that don't say a word, or they come in and they say, let's get it over with. They don't make eye contact. They might, be listening to what you're saying. But they may, just be very formal and they may shut down. Those things happen as well. Get through the process. Don't, address side issues or have discussion of political motivations or anything like that. But give them the opportunity to ask any questions as long as they are sticking to that particular situation and not trying to, pawn it off on, well, so-and-so does this and you never address that with this person. And I think it's because so-and-so is gossiping about this. We're focused on the situation with you right now. Okay. Again, there may be a stoic person. They shut down completely. They are not engaging in the conversation. And you kind of just go through the process and let them know that if they don't have any specific questions or feedback right now, that's okay. But we'll touch base with them tomorrow and see if they've had an opportunity to internalize, to process, and maybe they would have questions then. Okay. If you have an employee that is crying and sobbing, and I'm sure many of us on this call at some point in time have had one of those, or you may have one in the future, Give them an opportunity to express their emotions, offer some tissues, offer them, do we need to take a break? You don't want to, counter it defensively by saying, I don't understand why you're crying. This isn't anything to cry about. You don't want to downgrade their emotions. Some people cry when they're angry. Some people cry when they're frustrated. Some people cry because they don't know the words to get out to defend themselves. And so that's their, natural way of expressing emotion because it's all built up. Once they have regained their composure, stick with the facts, explain the next steps, and then, again, offer them support. If we go through all of this process, counseling, documentation, and we get to the point where we're still not working through what we need to work through, and we're at the time of separation, you always want to make sure that we're not violating any federal regulations or state regulations. And the big ones are right here on the screen. National Labor Relations Act. Excuse me, whether you're a union or even a non-union organization, just a friendly reminder, there are things covered underneath the NLRA that we call protected concerted activity. And those things are me discussing my wages, working conditions, benefits, safety, as well as talking poorly about my manager because I don't like the culture or how they're addressing something. All of those things are protected underneath the act, meaning, no, I can't write you up because you told your coworker how much money you made. Okay, I can't fire you for that. And I've gotten that question no less than 5 times in the last month. So just reminder there. Fair Labor Standards Act, if somebody has made a complaint against how they were paid or filed, a grievance that you docked their pay for something, you can't retaliate against that. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, those are all of your protected classes: age, race, sex, religion, national origin, genetic information. That's hostile work environment as well. Pregnancy Discrimination Act. No, you cannot terminate somebody who is on a open workers' comp claim. So please do not ask me. I will tell you no, and then you'll get upset with me because I told you no. But any of the ADA, FMLA, workers' comp, we're not going to terminate while they're on that. So here are my rules to fire by. Always rule number 1, they should never be surprised. I need to be able to sleep at night and feel confident that I have given them every opportunity to be successful in this organization. I onboarded, I touched point, I coached, I counseled, I disciplined, I've given them additional training and support. And unfortunately, having documented all of that, here we're at this time where today is going to be your last day. Rule number 2, you never fire anybody in anger. Rule number 3, we meet with the employee. We briefly recap how we got to this point, and then we're going to separate employment. We don't want to drag this whole thing out, but you also don't want to just bring them in and be like, you're fired. Okay. Focus on the facts again. One of the phrases that I use is, unfortunately, today is going to be your last day. Instead of saying you're fired. You can use that. It's helpful. Rule number 4, I try to avoid terminating on Friday afternoons or the day before and after holidays. The holiday thing is just mean. Friday afternoons, can be problematic at times because the employees have the entire weekend to kind of sulk and marinate on it and think about it. And especially if it was not a good separation, there are a lot of late night advertisements on TV about, were you wrongfully fired from your employer? Call Joel Bieber and we'll get you a wrongful termination lawsuit. So just avoid that. But here's what I want you to have a plan. There are a lot of times I get calls from managers, and when they got to the point of separation, they were not fully prepared to terminate with that employee. We didn't get keys back. We didn't get laptops back. We didn't cut email access. We didn't have our documentation ready so that they could sign it right then and there. We didn't have information to give them about COBRA and continuation of benefits and their final paycheck. So make sure you pump the brakes a little bit. Work with HR, work with your office manager, whoever is in charge of handling those things. There should be a formal separation of employment form drafted and put together so that when we have the separation conversation, me as the manager, the employee, and the witness, we're signing the separation of employment form in that moment. Have a plan. Also think about when we want to have this conversation. Again, private, important play, private, confidential, quiet place is important. You need to think about, do they have personal effects in their work area? If you're in the automotive industry and it happens to be a technician, they have big old, toolboxes. You can't just move those. You have to make arrangements to have those moved with a forklift and big truck and all those things. How are we going to get their personal items to them? Do we want to walk back with them to their cubicle, and do we have, a box ready? If you're going to do it that way, you need to schedule that strategically where most of their coworkers are not around, so they're not being paraded out carrying their box. That's humiliating. So think about the timing of all of those things. Again, give yourself an opportunity to coordinate with other departments to make sure that we can cut email, that HR is informed, that we have all of our ducks in a row before we sit down for this conversation. Okay. Always be respectful, explain the termination reason, have that form ready to go that talks about the separation provisions, and then express confidence in that employee. Look, I'm sorry it didn't work out here, but I do really wish you the best, and I'm sure you'll find another organization where you're going to be really successful. Okay. So that kind of wraps discipline, documentation, separation of employment. Relationship is key, having good communication skills, but more importantly, the documents and following policy is so, so, so important. Lauren, do we have any questions?
Yes, we had one question. Can you go into further detail about that feedback sandwich you were talking about?
Yeah, so the feedback sandwich is really just starting with something positive, hitting them with the facts based on policy and observable behaviors, and then ending on a positive note, summarizing, expressing confidence. That feedback sandwich, again, helps maintain the self-esteem of the individual that we're working with.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was the only question, unless anyone else has any other questions.
Yeah, I see a lot of questions coming in about the slides. As I mentioned when we first got started, yes, you will receive a copy of the slides along with a copy of the recording. Lauren will be sending that out later.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. If there are no other questions, then I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Again, if you have HR needs or situations that you want to run by SESCO, feel free to reach out to either myself or your account manager, and we can get you connected.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a great one.
Bye.